y'all. Welcome back to Whole Wellness with Ann. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to tune in. I certainly hope that if you've watched any of my other videos that they've been helpful and informative and supportive and encouraging in nature. I promised after the abuse series to do another series on the boys. And I'm just going to leave it at the boys because in the abuse series where I walk you through my history and the way I was raised and my memories and the dynamic in my childhood and the family that I grew up in, I left out a huge and influential portion of my life because that series, as you well know, is a very long series. It's like 33 videos, I think. But it goes into my family history and goes through a lot of detail about, my parents and their upbringing and what does abuse mean. And it goes throughout like my earliest memories throughout into my college years and young adulthood. But one portion of that series that I completely left out because that series then would have been 50 videos long and it wasn't relative to the topic, which was the abuse I suffered growing up from my family of origin, in particular and specifically my parents, my mom, my dad, and my two older brothers. So the most influential and physically close people to me, how abusive they were mentally, emotionally, physically, sexually, spiritually, throughout my childhood, my teen years, and well into young adulthood. And I promised towards the end of that series to do another series that explored the boys in my life and the relationships that I had with various boys growing up from my earliest years, probably if I can remember right around 7th grade, maybe 8th grade, throughout young adulthood, until I met, you'll hear about that soon enough. My husband, and we got married. My husband and I now have been married for 25 years, but I have a long history of many, many, many different boys in my life. And when I say that I have a long history with many, many different boys, it literally is just that. Like when I say a long history and many, many different boys, that's it. I'm talking about boys that I might have even just had one conversation with. Like we're not talking about serious boyfriends that, we had an exclusive relationship and dated for a long period of time. I'm not talking about that. I wanted to do this series on boys to demonstrate to you what happens to a young girl when she has an absent father. I'm going to do my best as I go through my experiences to be very clear about what kind of relationship it was and what kind of exposure and interaction I had with this boy so that you can kind of see the pattern over and over again of these unhealthy people that I allowed into my life and the desperation and the clinging and the reaching for attention and affection that was strongly missing from my relationship with my dad as I was growing up, and how important it is for a young girl to have a male role model. And I am not, please don't misunderstand me. If you are a single mother, please do not take that to mean that you're failing, because I do believe in some circumstances that a mother can fill the role of both father and mother, and that a single father can fill the role of a mother and father if he or she is very careful and very loving and very supportive and healthy themselves, and or getting support from a counselor or therapist, and or has family or friends helping him or her. For instance, a single mother who has a very healthy brother or a very healthy father stepping in and playing the male role model to the daughter, and or the single man who has a daughter who has, this single man may have a mother that is a strong female influence in the daughter's life. And if they're healthy, it can be done. You can be raised in a home and you can turn into a very healthy woman or man having been raised by a single parent with the absence of a father and or a mother. It can happen. I've seen it happen. I think maybe you remember me mentioning in the abuse series my childhood classmate, Wendy, who picked on me relentlessly. She was a very angry child and she was very hurt. She was a jerk to me in 4th grade, in 5th grade, I believe in 6th grade. And at some point in time, her dad committed suicide and her mother was left to raise, I think they had 5 kids on her own. And I'm sure it was a ton of hard work for her mom to raise those 5 children by herself. And not to imply that she didn't struggle, I'm sure she struggled and she worked very hard. But that's a success story, to raise 5 children as a single mother, working your tail off after your husband committed suicide and not completely falling apart. Not that it would be unreasonable if she did fall apart. I mean, maybe she did have some help, I don't know. But even if she did, the fact that she survived and she raised these kids and turned them out to be, as far as I know, wonderful adults, because I'll tell you what, when Wendy graduated, I think she was our valedictorian or our salutatorian. I don't know. She had good grades and she was one smart cookie and she was not the jerk that she was when we were in 5th grade. And so it can be done. I know it to be true. And she's just one example. See, I'm the perfect example of a person who grew up in a home with both a mother and a father throughout childhood and well into high school and college and young adulthood, when her parents finally divorced. And was it the right thing to do? Was it the smart thing to do? I don't know. All I do know is that my parents staying together didn't guarantee a healthy childhood or a healthy upbringing for myself or anybody else in my family, any of my siblings. And then I mentioned my cousin who lost her dad around the age of 11 to cancer. And then we have the case of Wendy, where her dad committed suicide and her mother raised all of the kids, and she turned out, as far as I know, perfectly well and well-rounded and successful. And it's astounding to me because the father she had obviously had issues, had some problems, had some struggles, felt alone, had some scars or some wounds that were never dealt with, or had some overwhelming feelings to the point where he took his own life. Whatever happened in their private life prior to his suicide, I don't know, but I can't imagine the pain and the suffering and the grief that they experienced once he committed suicide, and then they came out on the other side and they were perfectly functioning adults and contributing members of society. So I'm not saying it can't be done. You got me and you got Wendy, you know what I mean? But I'm a perfect example of what happens when someone has unhealthy parents and the parents stay together, and there's that constant push and pull and push and pull, and the abuse is cyclical and the environment is just toxic. And that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to take the abuse series a little bit further, and I'm going to demonstrate in this series what happens to a girl when she's completely emotionally neglected and abandoned by her father and has no healthy male role models in her life, despite the fact that her parents stayed together. Now, also another disclaimer, I'm not saying in this intro video or throughout this series that if you think that you're in a situation where it's worse to stay together and you should just leave, I'm not saying that, because in some circumstances it's definitely better to stay together for the children. It depends on your situation. So I don't want anybody to make presumptions about what I'm implying here. All I'm talking about in this series coming up about boys is my experience, my struggles that I went through and experienced as a young girl with an emotionally detached and neglected father and a mother who was mentally unwell. And I hope you stay tuned for that series coming up soon. Video number 1 will probably drop next week. I hope you tune in. As I mentioned, is this huge chunk of my past that's missing from the abuse series, because the abuse series was focused on my upbringing and the people that I was raised with, my family of origin. And as we get into the discussion on boys, we're going to touch on different relationships and different influences that boys had, from just classmates of mine to boys that gave me attention, to boys that I liked, to actual relationships that I had. And what I'm going to demonstrate to you is the cyclical nature of bad relationship, bad relationship, bad relationship, and complete ignorance, complete ignorance, complete ignorance as it relates to boys. And also reaching for attention, begging for attention, wanting attention and affection and male companionship and approval and everything that I was missing from my dad as a young woman. I'm putting myself out there, and some of the stuff is just, it's going to be hard for me to talk about because I have been an absolute fool my entire life as it pertains to boys, but with very good reason. So I certainly hope you guys tune into that series dropping soon. And I can't announce right now how many videos it's going to be. My guess is around 5 videos. It's not going to be as long as the abuse series, but there's a lot to cover and a lot of boys, as I mentioned. And in the meantime, I'm going to be putting together all the content line up for those videos in that series. So if there's something particular that you want me to specifically address in any one of the videos, please let me know. And as always, thank you so much for tuning in to Whole Wellness with Ann. I can't wait to start this series and get going on the discussion with boys. I'm so terrified to talk about this, but it's got to be talked about. It's got to be covered. It's real. I'm sure that there's women out there and even men that have walked the same path that I've walked with complete and utter ignorance as it pertains to the romantic relationships that we've navigated in our lives. Thank you so much for tuning in, guys. Once again, take care of you.